Let's start the next story, One Fair Season. Question 16 asks about the sentence, at first glance, a Renaissance fair looks a lot like a theme park, and asks about comma placement. So at the beginning of the sentence, we have a prepositional phrase, at first glance. And the rule with prepositional phrases at the beginning of sentences is that you need a comma following it, but then if you only have a subject and verb with some prepositions after it, you don't need any more commas. So we need at first glance, comma, a Renaissance fair looks a lot like a theme park with no comma in there. So that would be option H. Question 17 asks about the sentence, crowds of people mill about, moseying their way past characters in colorful booths. And if we look at the options, we need to consider the word there and the word past and decide how we want this to look. So right now, this there is referring to the crowds of people. So we want the possessive there, T-H-E-I-R. So that rules out A or B. Now let's look at the word past. Here, past is a preposition because they're going past people. They're not actively passing others. And that means that we actually want P-A-S-T, not P-A-S-S-E-D, because that is the verb version. So let's go with option D. Question 18 asks, being that roller coasters and Ferris wheels, the fair's attractions are the sights, sounds, and tastes inspired by 16th century England. Essentially, this sentence is saying that the attractions are not roller coasters and Ferris wheels like a traditional fair. Therefore, we want something that negates this clause, this first clause. So, let's see what our options are. So, being that doesn't negate it, neither does because of or given that, but yet instead of roller coasters and Ferris wheels, the attractions are sight, sounds, and tastes works great. Option 19 asks about the sentence, horses carrying knights to a jousting match walk along the streets. So here it's asking if we need to add any additional commas. In this sentence, because it's just horses carrying knights, right? The subject is horses and they're carrying the knights. We actually don't need any commas or anything like that at all. So we can just go with option A. Question 20 says, which choice best conveys the horse's movements in a way that adds sensory detail to the description of the fair? So we want something that adds sensory detail. So let's look at our options. Walk, move, and travel are just describing the translational motion. They're not really telling us anything about what it looks, sounds, feels like, tastes like, smells like. Those are sensory details. Clip clop, however, adds an auditory detail. So that one adds the sensory detail we're looking for. Question 21 asks about the sentence, vendors ranging from king-size turkey legs to suits of armor peddle wares. And in sentences like this, we generally want this appositive phrase, which is ranging from all the way down to armor, because it's in commas and it's describing a noun, to actually point to what it's describing, would be right next to it. So here, we would like a sentence where wares is right next to its description. So let's look at our options. So the current one doesn't work because it's next to vendors, and the vendors aren't ranging from king-size turkey legs or suits of armor. So that's what they're selling. Peddling wares ranging from king-size turkey legs to suits of armor are vendors. So this one does have wares in the right place, but it uses the passive voice, which we don't want. Generally, we want to stick to the active voice where the vendors are peddling the wares. Next is ranging from king-size turkey legs, vendors peddle wares. Again, this doesn't really fix the problem. Vendors are still being mispointed to. And the last one says, what vendors peddle wares ranging from king-size turkey legs to suits of armor. That one works perfectly. Question 22 says, which best introduces the subject of the paragraph and the rest of the essay? And says, I've always enjoyed attending Renaissance fairs, and I just found out how interesting they are. And the following sentence says, those of us working at the fair spent weeks perfecting our characters' accents and mannerisms and incorporated 16th century English vocabulary into their speech. So we want something about working, not just like how they found out how interesting they are. So F is probably not ideal. G says, but it wasn't until I spent a summer working at one that I understood how much effort went into recreating the past. That one fits pretty well, but let's look at the rest. And it says, and I knew that getting a job at one would be the easiest way to experience one and have fun at the same time. So it looks like this is going to start talking about the work and the effort, not really just the fun and the excitement. So let's not go with this one. And the last one says, so one summer's day, some friends and I decided to attend a nearby fair. Again, this doesn't touch on working on it, so we don't want to mention that one as well. Let's go with G. Question 23 asks about the sentence, we also incorporated 16th century English vocabulary into our speech, period, substituting good morrow for good morning and gramercy for thank you. So here right now there's a period and a new sentence, but this actually doesn't work because the second sentence, substituting good morrow, etc., does not have a subject. So if we're going to keep the ing verb substituting, which looks like most of the options do, we need to combine the two sentences. So 23A won't work because we need to combine them. And D also does not work because a semicolon combines two complete sentences, and we don't have two complete sentences. Option B says we also incorporated 16th century English vocabulary into our speech, comma, we substituted, and then the words. And the reason we don't want that one is because we're creating two complete sentences. We incorporated and we substituted. And you can't combine two complete sentences with just a comma. That creates a run-on. That leaves us with option C, which works because substituting good morning and thank you is in a positive phrase for speech. So a comma is a great way to add that phrase. Question 24 asks, in my role as a lady in waiting, I often use 16th century expressions while I served the queen's meals or introduced her to guests. And it asks about the word introduced. So here we want to match the tense of previous words. So I often used is past, and while I served is also in the past tense. So we want to stay to the past tense. So introduced works, but let's look at the rest. To introduce does not work because it's not in past tense, neither is introducing or introduce. So that leaves us with F. Question 25 asks about the sentence, it was exhausting to spend every day in the hot summer temperatures while pretending to be a person whom had lived in a different country and century. So because person is at the beginning of this clause, it actually takes the nominative or subject case because the person lived in a different country and century. So we want it to be who, not whom, because whom is for direct objects or what verbs refer to. So that rules out A and C. Now, in choosing between B and D, B says who were to live in a different country and century. So that doesn't quite make sense because were to live suggests that they were supposed to live there but didn't. So, and they did live there. Therefore, we want who lived. That works great. 25 is D. Question 26 asks about the sentence, the physical demands were especially strenuous for the queen and us ladies in waiting because our costumes, comma, they consisted of confining corsets, several starchy petticoats, and heavy velvet gowns. So we actually don't want any of the options with the word they in it following a comma because it creates a run-on sentence because both parts could have been sentences on their own. So that rules out option F and G. Option H says it was especially strenuous for us because of our costumes consisted of. And we don't want that one because we actually already have a verb and prepositional phrase following. So we want something that can be a subject of the second clause. So we don't want that. Option J works though because our costumes consisted of all these items. So let's go with J. Question 27 asks, at this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. Many theme park characters have to wear uncomfortable costumes, and asks if they should make the addition here. So right now we're talking pretty deeply about their experience of working at the Renaissance Fair and the costumes they wear is just another sentence added. So we probably don't want to add it. But let's look at the options we have for no. So no, because it adds a comment that's only loosely related at this point in the essay. So that's correct, right? We're not really talking that deeply about comment about the costumes. And D asks, no, because it repeats information stated elsewhere. So we haven't really talked about this yet, so this isn't true. Let's go with C. Question 28 says, we strove to make the fairgoers' experience as authentic as possible. Things that had come into existence more recently after the 16th century had to be explained in Renaissance terms. So as usual, we want to stick to a concise one, right? With these kinds of sentences, oftentimes all of them are grammatically correct, but only one of them makes sense in the context of the essay and is as concise as possible. So F here, this is pretty long. G is even longer and seems to have a lot of unwieldy prepositional phrases. I'm not even going to read it. And H just says anything invented after the 16th centuries had to be explained in Renaissance terms. That's pretty good, pretty concise and accurate. But let's look at J. J just says stuff from after. That one is correct, and it is shorter, but it is a little colloquial for this relatively formal essay. So let's go with option H. In general, if something has a word like stuff in it, it's almost automatically incorrect. Anyway, question 29 asks about the word however, saying, we had to describe things in Renaissance terms. Blank, when a guest wished to take a photograph, we would marvel at the camera and ask how such lifelike paintings were created from inside the tiny box. So this is providing an instance of where they had to explain something in Renaissance terms. So however is usually used in contrast, and we're not contrasting anything, so that's not correct. For example works, right? That's describing an instance. One time is also describing an instance, but it suggests that it's something novel and different, which it really isn't, right? This is something we have to do all the time. So this one isn't correct. Instead also suggests negation, which isn't the case. We're trying to give a positive affirmation. So let's not go with that one. Let's go with B. The last question asks about the sentence. After 3 tiring months of rehearsals and performances, the fair closed for the season, and I bade fare thee well to my Renaissance character when the summer months were over, and asks if we need to change or keep this clause. So if we look right, we already say the fair closed and bid goodbye, 3 tiring months. So we already have all of this temporal description. But let's look at the options. When the fair closed down. So we already said it closed. That's redundant. The current one, when the summer months were over, is also redundant, right? We already said that we already worked for the summer, etc. And at the end of the summer is also redundant. So let's go with J, deleting the underlined portion at the end of the sentence. There are a few tips that are really important when completing this passage. One has to do with verb tense and sentence structure matching. In general, try to follow the pattern of the sentence and passage, especially in terms of the endings of verbs and noun phrases. Second of all, avoid colloquialisms at all costs if the essay itself is relatively formal. These are often quick answers that you can easily eliminate when trying to decide which one is correct.